You are listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propagandhi. On this episode, I am delighted to welcome Jord Samolesky for his second appearance on the podcast. Jord was last on the podcast on May 26th, 2021, for a conversation on Propagandhi's covers of global genocide and government issue songs that appeared on the deluxe editions of Failed States and Victory Lap. This episode was a really fun conversation, but I do have a few things to say before we launch into it. Jord and I were interrupted by an internet outage 3/4 of the way into the conversation, which derailed our timing and made us run out of time. So the conversation has a discussion about Propagandhi's endless search for practice spaces, which suddenly cuts into a conversation about the song Support Gun Control, Kill a Hunter from the Martial Law with a Cherry on Top demo. Then, a few minutes later, the conversation ends abruptly when we hit our hard stop time. Jord was very gracious and kind about this issue and sent some notes in relation to the band J Church, the Maximum Rock and Roll compilation, They Don't Get Paid, They Don't Get Laid, But Boy Do They Work Hard, and a few memories about the Fuck the Scene and Martial Law demos. In order to not interrupt the flow, I am going to include Jord's verbatim email he sent me after our conversation abruptly ended, which I will read at the very end of this episode so you're not hearing the comments out of context here at the start of the conversation. Jord and I start this conversation by talking about his recent studio experience at Private Ear Recording in Winnipeg, Manitoba, where Propagandhi is recording their 8th LP. Then we talk about Propagandhi's May 2024 Gaza benefit show at the Park Theater in Winnipeg, and then we turn our attention to talking about the 1989 to 1992 pre-Fat Records demo tapes. Thank you so much, as always, to Propagandhi and Jord for being awesome and coming back on the show to fill in listeners on what is going on in their band. So please enjoy my second conversation with Jord Samolesky. Jord, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, Greg, how's it going?
Excellent, thank you. It is wonderful to have you back after. I think we last talked in 2021 for some Propagandhi cover songs, but it's delightful to get together again and hang out and chat about how things have been. Propagandhi has been off the road since September of 2022, and I know there's a lot going on. I'm wondering if you just want to start off by giving a little bit of your general thoughts on the past year and a half since the band has been off the road and what you all have been generally up to in that time.
Yeah, I guess you could say that 2022 was one of the most challenging years that we've ever had in terms of trying to arrange live shows. Like that was a batch of cluster Fs. If you, yeah, I mean, we tried to do some shows in May out east in Canada, and then in September out west in Canada. We were supposed to go down the west coast from Seattle to San Diego that September, but yeah, we ended up getting derailed by COVID on both of those trips. So unfortunately, we had to cancel some shows in Saskatchewan on the front end of our May dates, and then the entire back end of our September dates got canceled. We had COVID issue in Vancouver that we were aware of the day that we were supposed to cross into the US and head down to Seattle and do 7 shows down the coast. Our booking agent Margie in the States did a great job putting everything together, and it was the aftermath of having to cancel those dates. It dragged on for another 6 weeks, and we ended up doing 3 makeup dates in Southern California, in Pomona, LA, and San Diego on I think on like a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It was so we were starting to kind of write over the course of like that year, getting some riffs together and kind of jamming on new stuff, but we kept going back to perform, like getting prepped for live shows and all that kind of stuff. And it put us really through the ringer. And towards the end of that, it was like, okay, these makeup shows were okay. Trying to play on a show on a Monday or a Tuesday that was originally scheduled for a Friday or Saturday. Like it just had the vibe was affected. A lot of people you know, didn't take the rebates on their tickets, and many of them didn't show up. So it was kind of like two-third full rooms. And I mean, we tried to do our best to kind of accommodate makeup dates, but it was just really hard. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of bands that get faced with that, it's like you have slim pickings for the venues, and you're not going to get anything close to the original sort of what the original dates were intended to be like and all that. It was so I think we kind of hung it up at the end of October, and we're just kind of like, okay, that is the end of live shows. Let's just forget about that for a while. And I think at that point it really took the edge off of feeling like we had to do a bit of both, like
Mm-hmm.
trying to write, trying to stay engaged with, doing the live stuff. And that's also after a few, the whole COVID era. We didn't play any shows, I guess, in between like 2019 and 2022. So there was a big gap there of, and that the pressure slowly mounting. Okay, we got to start doing stuff. What are we going to do and all that? And in a nutshell, it was like 2022 was just kind of a mishmash of trying to go in a million different directions and getting stuck with so much troubleshooting, figuring things out as things were falling apart. And it was really draining. So that just led us to, let's forget about this stuff. We're not going to play anymore until we actually have at least some studio dates you know penciled in and all that. So I guess that takes us to now. So I don't know if you knew, but we did a number of dates in July, recording at Private Ear here in Winnipeg
Mm-hmm.
with our friend GP. Originally, like I think it was in May. Yeah, March, April, May of this year, we were thinking that we were going to be recording everything in late October of this year. And we were aware that JP and Vanessa had a few dates open in July, like Tuesday to Thursday dates,
Mm-hmm.
3 consecutive weeks of 3 dates being open, but the
Mm-hmm.
Friday to Mondays being blocked off. And they said we could keep our gear set up after we got sounds, and if we wanted to take advantage of that time. And we kind of molded over. And I don't know. Originally, I thought, no, let's just keep it all together. But then we thought, hey, if we break it up a little bit, that'll give us time to recharge the batteries in between. Track for a few days, take a few days off to actually kind of continue prepping and working on stuff a little bit in the like miniature downtime that we had between the 3 day sessions. And I think it worked out really good. Like I liked having days on and then days off. I think it was largely circumstantial. We didn't plan it like this, but I think it kind of worked in our favor in a lot of ways. So yeah, we're done a significant bulk of the drum tracks, and we're going to revisit another batch of songs in October. And it's kind of like a two-part process. So I think from now to October, we'll see about if any other dates become available there to maybe do some bass tracking and stuff, and try to get some of the instruments and maybe some vocals, I think, going. And then continue tracking drums in October, and we'll see how things go from there. I think we have
Interesting.
some mixing time penciled in for November, December, maybe. Yeah, so everything as of right now is still on track, even though we're pretty early in the process, I guess.
So this seems like a way different way of recording a record than you might be used to, right? Have you ever done it like this before where it's in these like chunks of time that are like super spread apart over long periods of time?
No, no, we've usually, kind of, well, at least as far as drums
Hmm.
go, we usually kind of get in there and get sounds and just kind of get cracking and try to get the drums done in however many consecutive days possible. I'm thinking back to before we started working with JP at Private Ear. So that would have been supporting cast. Like a lot of those, yeah. And when we did Potemkin City Limits, like it was just kind of day after day. I can't remember. I think sometimes we took a Sunday off, but it's
Hmm.
just kind of like day after day after day. And that I think in retrospect has a way of just kind of wearing you down a little bit. I find the studio tracking process to be like it takes a lot of energy, like to just be mentally on throughout an entire day where it's like, okay, you get a little bit done in the morning and then, okay, when are we going to get moving on afternoon stuff? So just trying to stay loose throughout the whole day and engaged and keeping your blood moving and all that kind of stuff. It's not exactly easy. It's not tremendously like it's not rocket science, but it's just kind of I don't know. Every time I go through it, I feel differently about it a little bit. But this time, I certainly appreciated the little pauses in between to kind of And I guess I should mention too, like when we at Privateer, we were leaving all the drums set up. So I'm fortunate enough now to have a kid at home and another one at our practice space. And so I had kind of like three kits set up. And it's like, okay, if I'm at home, I can do this. If I'm in the city, there was one night that we were going to crash at my sister's place. And it was just like an opportunity where I could get a good practice day in there where she was out doing some stuff with some friends. And ultimately, yeah, our room, my sister's place, a little bit hot. I need my cool sleeping zone to recharge my batteries fully. So I ended up spending most of my time practicing out here, just a little out of town, but it worked. I think it worked out pretty good.
Sweet. I'm curious about the preparation of anything that's like maybe totally different than anything you've ever done on past records, or if there's any preparation leading up to this record that might be something that's like unique across all of your recording experiences.
Yeah, well, I think certainly the most unique aspect of kind of juggling through, I guess, the general process of aging and having done this for so long. I don't know. I've been struggling with tinnitus since the late 90s, and I actually had this weird situation kind of happen towards the end of 2022, actually, that December, where I was consulting with some hearing specialists and stuff. And I don't know. I'm still trying to put it together. I have like a two-tone tinnitus issue. Like my tinnitus went haywire on me, and it changed quite a bit to such uh, like a radically different sort of sensory experience, I guess, 24/7 relentless sensory experience that yeah, I had to really we spent a lot of time in the early part of 2023 last year refiguring out and measuring decibel levels of our jam space and kind of coming to some shocking realizations about how how much louder it is from the sitting position of where I was at um, right behind the drums and say even 5 or 7 feet over from where the other guys are standing in front of their
Hmm.
amps. And even the decibel readings in front of the guitar or bass amps compared to what it was like right by my ears. If I'm
Yeah.
playing loud, max sort of cymbal crashing and max exertion and that kind of stuff. So those early months of last year, Chris and I, we like, I gotta really thank those guys for their patience and diligence with helping me figure this stuff out. But we were measuring stuff out at the practice space and just being like, okay, this is completely insane. And I was dealing with two different audiologists, just trying to figure out what's safe at this point. Like I can't imagine going through a third sort of phase of this hearing issue and all that. And so yeah, we really took a lot, like it was a number of weeks to figure out dB levels in my basement at our practice space, what adds up, like adding different layers to it and everything else. And what we kind of came to is like I started practicing on a drum kit that we've kind of had buried for a good 10 years, thinking that it might be a little bit quieter than our other kits. They have wood hoops on them. We thought maybe if I lightened the gauge of sticks that I was, comfortable playing with, I think since like the later 90s, and pulling back on cymbals. I was playing with extremely light gauge drumsticks and broken cymbals for the better
Hmm.
part of last year, just to keep it in check and allow us to spend a lot, like enough time in there jamming and working on the new material and stuff without kind of exhausting ourselves and in our ears. And also, I've temporarily ditched in-ear monitors, and it was really really tricky. Trying to protect my hearing with earplugs and like industrial cups over top, and then having us like a external amp kind of blasting at me. So it's this weird, how much of how much of this is one step forward, one step back, and are we really achieving anything? But I think we managed to get it down to a point where, and with the coaching of some of the people, this one audiologist who was measuring the output of my in-ears and trying to get a sense of how loud it would be in our room and stuff. And I think we managed to achieve it. Like we rolled it down to a much more comfortable level. And I think with like one thing I'm noticing with the change of the gauge of sticks is that my elbow problems are partially going away as well. Like I'm feeling less wear and tear on my forearms, and I'm just thinking, oh man, if you could go back and change one thing, holy shit! Like I embraced bigger is better, louder is better, faster, everything. This sort of idea of like playing loud music like it's a contact sport. This old Dave Lombardo kind of quote that I sort of wore as like a badge of honor for so many years, just gritting and gutting it out and actually playing in pain a lot of the time. I think I was playing sticks that were just like, Jesus Christ, like these big pieces of lumber and breaking a lot of stuff at the same time. You're trying to get loud sounds out of the drums. And I think that's one of the tricky things now is playing quieter, but achieving an aggressive sort of tone without slamming the shit out of everything to the point where like I used to hit it as hard as you can.
Sure.
That's not really that musical, like
Yeah.
within that sort of paradigm of just playing hard, it sounds like how it sounds. You're just giving it everything you have, and when you're in your late 20s and 30s, like you can kind of roll with that. But then there's the cumulative effect of your joints and all that kind of stuff. And I ended up having not severe elbow problems, but problematic enough where I wore down some of the tendon wore down a piece of bone, and I was having this tendon slippage. And anyway, with physiotherapy and that kind of stuff, you can kind of help correct that, which worked for years. But now it's just like, no, play lighter gauge sticks, and the whole thing goes away by itself. Good
You
God.
know, well,
Breaking way less cymbals, let me tell
um,
you.
what is the gear like? Did you make any like gear changes for the new record? Like, give me like a little bit of a gear rundown of what like listeners can hear on this record that you all are making.
Well, drum wise, like I said, we went back to this AOT kit that kind of has a bit of a story to it. There was a guy that we knew locally many years ago, was getting a backline company together, and he was getting a number of AOT kits custom made for himself. And I think he needed one more, and they were going to give him like a pretty hefty discount. And he basically approached me and said, if you're looking for one of these kits, like, why don't we go, like, we can split the discount down the middle or whatever. So yeah, we got
Sweet.
this really nice custom AOT kit made for us. I think it was around 2002, 2003. And then we were all excited. Okay, let's take our AOT kit and go back to, BC where these things were made. And we'll we'll track our new record, Potemkin City Limits, with these drums. And we get out there, and the recording engineer was just like, nope, not using these. Forget it. He had no interest in them at all. I was like, I don't know. I was confused. I think we had different perspectives of maybe the exact time frame that the kit was produced. I think AOTS went through a lot of ownership changes, and maybe the process for building them changed over time. So I think we have a pretty nice sounding kit, to be honest. But yeah, so he didn't want to use it then. We used the toms on supporting cast, but not the kick or the snare. And then on failed states, we did the same thing. Like, everybody thought the kick drum it's a 20-inch kick. I think it's a little more standard to have bigger kicks on these recordings, and generally, like, you see a lot of 22s and maybe 24s, but especially like when we were doing those older records, it was like, no, we need the kick to be more present, like a larger, heftier sound. And I was into that. I wasn't gonna argue with those guys at that time, but this time we kind of came in thinking, no, let's use the small kick. And if we can, let's use the snare too, because like they were all built together. I think there's a little bit of I don't know, like carryover between the tone of the snare and the rest of the drums, like
Cool.
an organic carryover. And yeah, so we used everything on this on these last recordings, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I think it sounds pretty good. And I guess the other thing was that we decided to use smaller crash cymbals. And I think that's just something that I think we're going to stick with from now on. It's just, you have less riding on the crash. That's so much of the volume from where I'm sitting is just the crashing ride sections. But I think what we found was like we got to kind of like a happy middle with that stuff. I don't think we need the big roaring crash cymbals of old. Like, we seem to find like a sweet little zone with some of the options that we picked for this record. And we had a larger crash that we kind of swapped in, I think, for one or two songs, but it almost kind of felt like, oh, I don't even think we really need it. And yeah, so I think we kind of covered all the bases with this smaller, like more consciously smaller and more sort of decisive, just play it like you feel it and mean it, with a little bit less behind it. And I think we're sort of achieving similar results. Sounds pretty good.
Nice. Okay, so I did notice that you had a slightly different gear setup at the May 21st, 2024 show. I saw a little bit of video footage, and I did notice you wearing those big industrial ear coverings in the video.
Yeah.
And I did notice that the cymbals do look smaller for your
Oh,
live
yeah.
setup. So I've kind of noticed that you've been kind of moving the gear around as far as like what you're choosing to play on, which is really cool. But I'm curious, just like on your reflections on that show, because it's the only show you all have done in a long time, and it was a show that you performed as a trio for probably the first time in like 18 years or something like that. So curious on your reflections on the May 2024 show in Park at the Park Theater.
Yeah. It was also I think the shortest show that we played, like going back to probably 1991. Like, it was
Yeah,
pretty sure the set was a little under 20 minutes total.
yeah.
But I mean, that was one of the reasons why we were able to do that physically, that show. We knew that we didn't have time to prepare a full set. Like, we were unable to do a full show. And we weren't asked to do that. We were just asked to show up for like 15 minutes and, participate with this. It was a benefit show for the International Development and Relief Foundation, which was providing emergency medical kits to, people in Gaza and occupied territories. And it's something that we felt very strongly about supporting, and with a local initiative of some people that were kind of like, hey, we feel like we really want to do something. And it was like, yeah, we talked about it and it was like, yeah, our hearts are totally into this 100%. we wanted to participate, but realized we couldn't do a full show or anything. Like it was not in our ballpark of considerations to say, hey, let's do something like this ourselves and, get a benefit show together. It was really nice to do it with, people that we hadn't worked before. It was at the Park Theater. We played with a bunch of bands that it's like a multi-genre kind of,
The
a lot
lineup was
of
cool.
different performers playing like 15, 20, 30 minutes. It had such a good vibe to it. It was, it really, really felt good. Um, but the other side of that this was an occasion for us to kind of try out, like for me specifically, playing without in-ear monitors, which has been many years I've relied on those, and just to get a sense, like, can we do this? Like, how is this even going to come across playing like lighter? It was with that kit that I mentioned, and that was another thing about the show, was like, with so many performers and limited changeover time in between sets, I felt like, okay, I want to play that drum kit. I don't want to play a different backline kit. I'd gotten so used to this thing, and I was almost scared to get on like a larger kit. And that was kind of just part of it for me, was like, okay, if I can play these drums and offer it for everybody else to just use as the standard backline kit for the night. And thankfully everybody was really flexible. They were down with using it and didn't seem to have any issues. It's kind of a funny kit because the wooden rims, they actually sit higher on the drums than a normal flanged or die cast hoop would sit on a drum. Like they're a little bit tricky to play. You hit maybe a little more rim shots unless you're sort of aware of that physical difference. But everybody was cool with it. But I was kind of like, holy shit, this drum kit hasn't been on a stage in like 15 years. And one thing I remember about not liking about this kit was like a real bouncy, kind of active, live, like heavy music stage. If there's people on stage jumping around on that stuff, the hardware's pretty lightweight on this thing, and they would just bounce around. It's almost kind of like, I think I remember playing on maybe it was on a drum riser one or something, but it was just like, I'm playing a moving drum kit. Like, this is extra freaking hard. And the hardware is just so finicky, and a lot of things can kind of go wrong. There's so many things that you have to lock with a drum lock. Like for every stand, there's like 4 little things that you have to fasten into place. And if one of them comes undone, it could be a train wreck. And I think I remember even a tom rolling across the stage once while we were playing with this kit years ago. Just like, holy shit. And a few little pieces got lost over the years, and just sort of like ramshackle, Band-Aid fixes. And I was kind of like, oh man, okay, let's use this kit. But I was just kind of hanging around, kind of like on the side of the stage, hoping that nothing was going to go haywire with it during that May 21st show. And it held up perfect. And so it seemed like a success on multiple levels. And it was, like I said, it was nice to play with some bands that we otherwise, don't really cross paths with, but we know of locally. It had a really nice vibe in the room and backstage, like the other performers. It was just a really cool thing to kind of, I don't know, like it was a gathering with purpose behind it that felt like validating and powerful. For, you get stuck in your house, in your room, and where you're not talking about these things so much with other people. And it's, I don't know, sometimes I can get pretty frustrated and pretty down on what the US and Canada are doing around the world in so many different cases. And with this, I just feel like even just suggesting a ceasefire seems like some people see that as like this contentious issue. I'm just like, why? We got to get this out in the open and normalize this, the intent of this thing, and start, questioning our government and, the reasons for supporting what's going over there, this sort of tacit state support without question. And it felt just really good to participate in that, and to make money for for a very worthwhile cause. And yeah, it was
Love
good.
it. Well, these are some good updates from 2021 to the present day. And now, what I would like to do is go way back in time and chat about the pre Fat Records demo tapes the Propaganda made. I know this is going to be a really awkward segue for listeners out there, and they're like, what is happening now? You're going back to 1989 to 1992. But I want to do like a kind of lightning round about Propagandhi's demo years. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, and I think the last time we talked, I think I mentioned a little bit about us practicing in a few different spots on the U of M campus.
Yep. Yep.
Or
Yeah. So I know
the
that you've done
U
a little
M.
bit of I know that you did a little bit of revisiting the U of M campus recently. What have you been up to? And then I'll throw some questions at you about the 89, 91, and 92 demos.
Yeah, well, I went out to the U of M campus a couple weeks ago to just kind of social support for this student encampment that was protesting the situation in Gaza, and just listening to some really great speeches by some local folks, some great people involved. It was very, very interesting to hear the words of the student protesters, and yeah, it's just like I feel like the U of M is kind of this pretty conservative campus. I went there between 1998 and 1993. I studied there for 5 years, and I think back then it was kind of like there was student activism going on and on a conservative campus, yet there was no radio station at the U of M at that time. Like UMFM didn't exist, and I remember like the struggle to get that station going. There were votes every year for the student council. There'd be kind of this referendum vote for like adding I think it was like a $5 or a $10 levy to the student fees. I just couldn't believe it. Like, okay, that's nothing. Like, let's sign. And I think it got voted down once or twice while I was a student there. And it's funny because one of the no voice people is like this pro business guy, kind of like this less fees the better, low taxes kind of conservative framework. He ended up becoming a member of parliament for the Conservative Party for many, many years. He's a very successful politician, but anyway, finally it got ratified, and when the station got going, it was like holy shit! Like when I went to school, there was no campus radio in Winnipeg. I'm pretty sure that Winnipeg was maybe the largest urban center in the USA, Canada, countries that didn't have campus radio. Like it was the biggest city,
Hmm.
US or Canada, and now we have two. And I just feel like it's kind of this interesting trip because the U of M administration threatened legal action and pretty much shut down that encampment a couple days after I was there. It was all kind of people knew the direction that it was heading to, but it's just interesting, like the administration at a institution of higher learning kind of quashing dissent. And I mean, there was another situation a few months ago where the valedictorian for the U of M School of Medicine delivered this very powerful speech, connecting the dots between medical education and serving humanity with that and what's going on in Gaza. And he issued this very powerful statement as part of his address. And the U of M pulled it from their website, completely pushed it under the rug and everything. So I just want to say, like the administration is doing their part to silence voices on this issue. Now with this radio station, UMFM, you can refer to like Democracy Now! Plays on that station. Alternative Radio with David Barsamian is this excellent program. They have an archive. There's all kinds of great interviews he has this past year with some incredible people that I respect a ton. Noam Chomsky, Naomi Klein, Ilian Pepe. I think these are very, very important voices to hear. And you can hear that on local community campus radio. CKW is another local option for a lot of that programming, and it's so valuable. I feel like independent radio in Winnipeg is needed more than ever, and it's knowing that truth can't be silenced. Like, I mean, the corporate media does a pretty good job of just not reporting on certain things or having their bias, pretty well entrenched. But there are alternate voices out there, and I think they're very important. And I feel, people, if they should feel maybe compelled to, check into some of these voices to counter what they're hearing on mainstream radio. So going way back, like I was learning about like corporate influence in media and ownership bias and those sort of things in some of my classes years ago. And it like just walking around the campus after that protest, I was just kind of like, okay, I'm going to go walk back to my old dorm area and try to take a look at some of the spots that we used to try to practice. Oh my God, it's like just flipping over to that kind of stuff. When I was looking at those years, like we tried to kind of get things going in I think 86, and it just made me think of all the different jam spaces that we tried to get the ball rolling with in those early years.
Yeah.
Like there was a summer afternoon, I think, where it's like, Chris, my parents are away, I have that drum kit, it's set up, like I'm done with learning polka covers, let's fucking get this thing going. And Chris was really patient. We really struggled to kind of get the ball rolling back in those days. And a lot of it was like, okay, I'm, 16, 17, turn 18, move to Winnipeg. And it's like, okay, my parents' place doesn't work at all. It's not going to be a viable option to return to. Like there's the neighbors hate it, and so it's just, I can't believe that my 18-year-old self felt like we could set up a drum kit and Chris's amp in a dorm room with people right next door and try to get. So I think I mentioned last time, like I think our first jam attempt lasted maybe 5 minutes.
Yeah.
The second attempt, we took all of our stuff down the elevator into the basement, and there was these study carols. And I thought, okay, there's nobody down there. It's not near exam time, so let's rip off a couple jams down there. Maybe we can get a week's worth of jamming in the study carols. And we went down there, set everything up. I think we played for maybe 6 minutes that time, and somebody just walked in and like basically looking at us with this look of disbelief on their face. Like, what the F are you doing? Like,
yeah.
What are you doing? These are study carols. Oh God. Man, it's kind of funny and kind of bewildering how naive I think we were. And then I think I mentioned last time, like our third attempt to get something going on the U of M campus was in a multi-purpose little room that people used to play like 3-on-3 floor hockey. And so if we could nab that room occasionally and get in there before people came down for like, play some ball hockey, we'd nab the room, and occasionally we'd hear people coming down the hallway, and then it was like, okay, just start playing so that we can't hear them knocking on the door and having them shout us out of here. So we'd just create this massive racket until people went away. And then it was like, okay, I think we maybe have another 30 minutes to practice. Like just go over whatever we have. And it was pretty ramshackle. I think at one time we were set up on a Saturday thinking, okay, this is by far the safest time where we can get some jam time in down here. And there was some kind of conference going on upstairs, and the racket we were making was disrupting some kind of formal government proceeding that we didn't even know was going on. We had people from this conference banging on the door, and I just thought, oh, it's somebody wanting to use the room for floor hockey. So we just kept okay, let's just play nonsense until they leave. And we'd play for 4 or 5 minutes, just, open chords, smashing on crash cymbals and just playing nonsense. And then we'd stop for a second. And then immediately the louding got knocker, like they're just hammering on the doors, and then pretty much it was like, stop, stop. Like, and then we opened the door, like, what are you doing again? Like, oh my God, we just can't fricking win. So it was like after that, it was like, okay, this is a firm bail. I've completely failed. I thought 1988, 89 was going to be dorm room / jam space. I thought we can have this covered. And so we firmly bailed on that. And then over the next little while, I think we used Chris's folks' basement turned into our go-to place. So
Is that where you recorded We Don't Get Paid, We Don't Get Laid, Boy Are We Lazy, the first demo?
yes. Yeah, we did a lot of the demo stuff out of there, and it was and thankfully we had that space to fall back on because that was the productive spot. So, Chris didn't have to go halfway across the city. But it was tricky for me to get over there because that year I remember I didn't have access to a car, and the horrible transit system in Winnipeg in the winter is like I think I had to take, it was only one transfer, but yeah, you wait outside for 22 minutes and minus 25 weather to get your transfer and get out there. It was like quite a lot to get in one jam, but it was stable, and we actually started getting some progress done in Chris's parents' basement. So that was, I think, my one memory about adjusting to that was their family cat at the time, Joe, took a liking to, I guess, putting his mark on my stuff.
He knew that
And
you were the one terrorizing his peace of mind.
yeah, and fair enough. Like I come in invading the soundscape of his environment, and I think he felt like, okay, you're gonna be a part of this basement. Well, I'm gonna piss on all of your gear. So my old Pearl Export kit, I think I even had it just almost smelled after a while like the smell of the urine became kind of a part of the kit.
Hmm.
Over those many months of having it down there. But yeah, anyway,
Where did you guys do 91's Fuck the Scene demo? Where was that one recorded?
you know what? That was so long ago. I think it was the same place. And I was trying to figure out all of the different jam spaces that we had after Chris's folks' place. And I think we kept leaving to try different stuff and then going back to Chris's folks' basement. Let's see, I moved off campus. I moved into a rental house in the Fort Richmond neighborhood near the U of M. And I was my first foray into renting houses with other students was kind of like, okay, I was with a couple quiet guys. I wanted to get a lot of my academic work done and, kind of be serious about it. At that point, I'd had my 2 years of wasting time on campus, not doing it, not doing much work, basically. And yeah, so we set up a little spot in there. And I remember particularly working on some of the stuff that actually ended up appearing on How to Clean in that house. But when you're a student, like we were renting for 8-month leases, we'd leave at the start of summer. And then I was moving back to my parents' place in Portage La Prairie to work for those summer months. And I think, yeah, we had a bit of a jam space in the first rental house. I go back to Portage. We kind of, have Chris's folks' place is kind of more or less the more stable headquarters. And then I moved into a different house on the same block in Fort Richmond across the street from the previous space. And we had a little more success there. We actually at that point, I think we were jamming with John towards the last bit of my stay there. And we had a bit of a band room in that house as well. But yeah, again, bouncing back and forth to Chris's place. I moved out of that spot a couple years later, and then Chris and I rented a house in the West End, and we did a lot of writing. And again, having like we didn't learn anything from our previous few years of annoying people with just thrash jamming with complete abandon and having no idea how loud it is outside of your little drywall fucking arrangements. But so in the West End, the houses are pretty close together. We were practicing like idiots on the main floor of the house.
Oh boy.
And and I think just we're kind of like, well, we're in our own house now. We can't be bothering anybody. Like we just can't be. Those houses are built so cheaply, and the neighbor's place was literally, I think, about maybe 3 feet from ours, like this little tiny sidewalk in between. And I remember him saying, the neighbor saying early on, just kind of like, "Hey, are you guys practicing today?" And he just kind of had this kind of smirk on his face, and I was like, "Well, yeah, probably a little bit later on." He just kind of looked at me and said, "Yeah, well, that's cool. You guys start practicing. I just turn off my music and listen to you guys." Like, there's no way around it. It's bleeding right into my house. And anyway, what are you gonna do? Like we rented that house with that in mind. We were going to use this as a practice spot, and we did. We used it for quite a bit. But yeah, and I remember, some of the material on the later demos we were working on there. That was, I think, kind of more around like summer of 91, fall 91 into 92. And then I moved out of that spot to finish my schooling. And then after that, we embarked on the new world of actually paying for practice spaces for the first time after that. And yeah, we had a storefront on South Osborne. I remember when John was still with us in the band, that was our first real kind of actually, okay, now we're spending money on this. Let's make this work. And we've kind of gone with that pretty much since, having different pay. Winnipeg is a really, really tough city. I think it's the same in most places, I'm guessing, where it's, like shitty old industrial buildings that are falling apart, where the owners don't want to put any money into them at all. They just want to get something back. And it's just kind of a revolving door of those. And even with that, like we've gone in and out of a number of those places over the years and have fallen back on our own, living space. It's like for a lot of the Empire's stuff, we practice at a basement where I was living with a good old friend of ours that I grew up with in Portage, but we had our own stable place and we used that as a jam space for quite a while. And then over to Chris's place again, like we did a lot of the prep work for Potemkin at his place and for supporting cast as well. So, and that concern, where are we going to jam is ongoing to this very.
My only other question is, how do you feel about the martial law with a cherry on top song, support gun control, kill a hunter?
Well, that's funny because like that practice space that we had in the West End, that's where I remember, that's the only spot that I remember actually working on that tune.
Yeah.
And a lot of that stuff was written back in those days. Like we weren't thinking albums and, record labels and all that kind of stuff. We were just sort of playing shows at the Royal Albert and a few other venues. And it was kind of like a lot of like get some material together to piss some local people off and just kind of shits and giggles projects, that kind of stuff. And there was a band called an old band that we really liked back in those days, Guilt Parade from Toronto. They had this song, Ode to an Asshole, on their album Coprophobia, that We were big fans of this band. They're sort of obscure, but they kind of tied in a lot of different things that I think we liked about punk music at that moment. And it was almost kind of like if we're gonna be like a band, like what they were sort of like that's kind of where we're trying to get was sort of this guilt parade kind of what they were up to. And yeah, so we were farting around with a side project actually at that point, trying to just kind of do like a song, sort of like a country sort of riff, with a shuffle backbeat and just make a jokey kind of tune, kind of like along this guilt parade sort of thing. But we didn't really write that as Propagandhi. Like that was kind of done for a side show that we had with a couple guys from this band, Meat Rack, and we called ourselves Sweet Medusa. And I think we played on, I think it was a draft night at the Albert. I could be wrong about that, but it was just sort of like this one-off kind of thing. And we did that and ended up kind of stealing a song from that and kind of using it for the demo. So yeah, so that's kind of how that one kind of came about.
I love it. Well,
One other thing I wanted to quickly mention, Greg,
yeah,
was that first demo that we did. We don't get paid, we don't get laid, we're
yeah,
ever lazy, which was a take on this Maximum Rock and Roll cover, or
yeah.
sorry, it was a compilation album that Maximum Rock and Roll put out, and I have that album. Like I mail ordered that whenever that came out in '89 or something like that, and I pulled it out the other day, and it's just so trippy to see some of the bands on there and just jogging memories. Like we ended up crossing paths with Lance Hahn, who was one of the guys who got this thing together, and like playing with his band J Church, years later, and one of the other bands on there from Colorado, Dead Silence. Like I remember the Riot show we had in Denver.
As stated at the beginning of this episode, that is where Jord and I abruptly were cut off due to a hard stop time. So Jord sent me a little bit of an email, which I'm going to read now to add a little bit of closure to everything that you just heard. So Jord says this: about the Maximum Rock and Roll comp, it's kind of weird to see some of the bands included on that album that we ended up having some interactions with in the years to come. I mentioned we were fortunate to have the chance to tour with Lance Hahn of Cringer and his future band J Church a couple of times. Shortly after Todd joined the band, we actually had to become a hastily arranged version of the J Church rhythm section for a 6-show tour of Japan when their bass player and drummer weren't allowed into the country. We also played a show in Honolulu on the way home, where Lance grew up. It was a memorable experience, to say the least. We miss Lance. He was one of the best guys we've shared time with while away from home. Also, it's funny to think back to the time we spent in the singer for Dead Silence's kitchen after police literally instigated a riot, which ended up canceling our show at a community hall in Denver in 1995. The guy from Dead Silence, I'd previously ordered their album Beginning of the End, happened to live near the venue, and his kitchen turned into a site for a bit of a debriefing session after we'd witnessed cops kicking the shit out of young kids for the last hour or so. Very strange circumstances to meet someone for the first time, and perhaps our wildest non-show of all time. Anyway, an early goal of ours was simply to get reviewed in MRR. I'll have to try to find it, not sure if I have a copy or not, but I seem to recall our first demo receiving somewhat of an okay review, neither really positive or negative, and I don't recall the reviewer acknowledging our take on the MRR comp title, which kind of felt like a joke that had fallen flat. It was pretty underwhelming at the time. I remember being mildly disappointed. So, fuck the scene demo memory. Back to University College residence. My younger sister was living there in 1991. I was living nearby and would borrow her dual cassette player, which had the ability to make high-speed dubbed copies. I worked that cassette deck pretty hard for a week or so while she was at class. Thanks, Jana. I seem to recall making 30 copies and that the high-speed chipmunk versions of the songs were actually kind of catchy. Funny to think of seeing it for sale with that title in the local music section at a few record shops where it appeared. Even funnier when we learned that someone had actually bought a copy. So here's a martial law with a cherry on top tidbit. This was the demo my brother-in-law found at a Wolseley neighborhood yard sale. The owner was asking 50 cents. My brother-in-law tried to get him down to a quarter, but apparently he wouldn't budge from the initial asking price. Thanks, Aaron, for being willing to part with $50. Last note on the recent tracking endeavor. After the first day or so of getting settled in and getting a feel for the monitoring scenario, I was able to actually have a good time behind the kit. JP is super easy to work with and a nice guy to boot, which makes it even better. And when things were on a roll, it was a total pleasure and a super fun challenge. I think people are really going to like the next album. No obligatory horn tooting here. I honestly think it's a stellar batch of songs, and I can't wait to see how they turn out. All right, so that is the end of Jord's email that he sent me to conclude our conversation that was cut off. As always, thank you so much to the band for being so awesome and supportive with what we're doing here at the podcast. It really means a lot. Thank you so much to everybody out there if you've made it this far and you are still listening to this podcast more than 200 episodes into the lifespan of the show. It really means a lot if you're hearing this. So thank you so much to everybody out there for listening. And if you want to get in touch, you can email me at propagandipod@gmail.com. Take care.